So what happened essentially is that World War I devastated Russia. Nicholas II was the czar, the emperor at this time. Um, Russia had not yet industrialized, Germany had, and so Russia in war with Germany suffered terribly. And Nicholas kind of in a very unorthodox move, went to lead the army himself, leaving this weird power vacuum, which is where the famous, infamous Gregory Rasputin stepped in. He was this monk that Alexandra the Tsarina thought had magical powers. The nobles executed him also in a kind of shadowy, mysterious way. There are a million myths about all the different ways they had to kill him before he really died. So he's this kind of mysterious figure, but essentially the myths about him express this sense that, the ironclad system of the past is now falling apart under external pressures. Enter people like Lenin, who believe that this is exactly what has to happen in order for Russia to make its glorious transition into communism. If you want to find this kind of thinking in American life today, it's very easy. You just have to read some of the work of Saul Omarova, who is Biden's nominee for top bank regulator. Omarova has written that we need these big systems to go bankrupt in order for us to federalize them, in order to put all the banks in the hands essentially of the states to make one big bank, federal bank, rather than a federal option. We'll all just work with the government, right? So this kind of thinking is perfectly alive and well in America's left, and it was what Lenin thought was going to be the way forward. So there were two revolutions, one of which essentially deposed the Tsar. That was the February Revolution. Then there followed the October Revolution, which brought the Bolsheviks into power. There then followed a civil war. So this is an enormously turbulent period of time in Russian history. The Whites and the Reds then engaged in bloody conflict. The Reds were Lenin's Bolshevik army who had effectively taken over the cities, the urban centers. The Whites were this kind of coalition of people that didn't want Leninism. They were anti-communists by and large, and the reason that communism is now red is because the Red Army triumphed during this period. In comes the full Bolshevik rule and a developing decade, the 1920s, during which Lenin is consolidating his power and which eventually brings about the existence of the USSR. In order to make his dream a reality, Lenin thought it was necessary to essentially jumpstart socialist rule in Russia. So he had been already forming these Soviets, which is just a Russian word for council, these sort of local so-called workers' councils. During the war, Lenin goes full bore into what's called war communism. And this is the first of the kinds of things that we see in like Mao's Great Leap Forward, where in order to effectively create this utopia that history is bringing into being, but also we kind of have to help it along, socialist leaders have a way, communist and socialist leaders have a way of just forcing industrialization. Lenin nationalized everything, manufacturing, industry, all throughout Russia, took gains from the rural areas to feed the cities, and essentially forced the requisition of just all resources throughout the country. Millions of people died of famine in this as a result of this. This was the first, arguably, of the great catastrophes that Soviet rulers brought into being.